Good morning, everyone. We are learning Lila Nishmas Mindel Mariam Bas Kalman Reuven her Neshama Shvan Aliyah. We are on Ayin Zayin Amud Beis at the two dots on like maybe 8 lines down, or Tanur Rabbanan 77b1. Tanur Rabbanan, the last word on the English side on the first column, and 2 dots in the Hebrew. Okay. Tanur Rabbanan, Hamotzi Chalav, right? So the Mishnah basically had a bunch of, went through a bunch of different substances and told us the measurements that are needed, the measurements that are considered substantial enough that if a person carries that measurement, they are going to be chayav a chatas. Okay, so Tanur Rabbanan, Hamotzi Chalav shel behema kidei gemia. When the Mishnah, this first line is the same as the Mishnah. The Mishnah said if you take out milk, it's enough to swallow the milk. But now the Bryce over here specifies and says the milk that we're talking about is the milk of an animal. However, chalav shel isha, if it's the milk of a woman, human milk, the loven shel beitza, or the white of a raw egg, kidei litain b'mishifa shel kilar, is enough to put into the kilar ointment. Okay, what is a kilar ointment? Kilar ointment was a fairly common type of mixture that people would use in order to put on their eyes. If they had eye damage, and then this kilar was like the standard medicine that was used, the standard ointment that was used, and the way to make it, one of the ingredients was to either have human milk or a raw egg in it, and therefore, because that is like the measurement, because human milk or raw egg is the white of a raw egg is used for this ointment, therefore the amount that's mixed in, which is not a large amount, that's the amount. If you carry that amount, that's substantial enough, and therefore you're going to be chayiv. Okay, kilar. If a person takes out kilar itself, the ointment, kidei lashu f'mayim, it's enough. One has enough to mix it with water. Okay, so basically one of the things, either it was mixed with milk or egg white, or it was mixed with water. So kilar, the amount of that's the dry substance that is used for the ointment, enough that's used to mix with water. Once you have enough kilar that would be used to mix with water, that would be enough. Carrying that amount would be enough. Okay, Rav Ashi asked a very technical question. Kidei shifa, when we said that there's enough kilar to apply to the eyes, is it enough to make the application? O kidei achiza v'shifa, or is it enough to hold the kilar and to apply it to the eyes? What does that mean? That means if you ever put on cream in your life, you know that there is going to be a little bit of substance left on your finger, right? You're not going to get every single thing off. So Rav Ashi asks, when we say the measurement, is it the measurement that's actually needed for the eyes, or is it the measurement for the eyes with which in a normal scenario where you're applying it to the eyes, which would mean a little bit extra, because a little bit extra is going to stay on your finger. Okay, very technical question. How much of a difference is that? Very small. Teku, we don't have an answer to that question. Okay. Dvash, now we move on to the next substance mentioned in the Mishnah. Dvash k'dei litain ala kasis. Honey enough to place on a sore. And then we quote a brisa which goes into a little bit more detail, although it's still not clear. Tana, k'dei litain al pi kasis. When it says enough honey, it means to place it on the head of a sore. So by Rav Ashi wants to know exactly what that means, to place it on the head of a sore. Al kasis, so by Rav Ashi asks, al kasis apuma de kula kasis. When it says that it goes on the head of the sore, does it mean the face of the entire sore? Okay, meaning the entire sore. Odilma amorsha kama de kasis, or is it on the highest point, which means the tip of the sore? Okay, so very often you have a sore, right? And then at the tip of the sore is kind of like where like there's like a tip, right? It basically goes up. And so does he mean just the tip? Will you put it like right at where it's usually the most like sore? Yeah, where it's the most sore, or does it mean then the entire sore? Okay, lapuke hodrana delo, to exclude the area around the tip, which is not included. Teku, we're not sure. Okay, a very small, minuscule difference, but Rav Ashi is trying to clarify all these details. Amar Yud, Amar Rav. Okay, now we're gonna have, I guess, like we'll call like light agadata. You're very interesting agadata. We'll read through some of this and we'll come back to some of this later at the end of the shir. Amar Yud, Amar Rav. Kol ma shebara Kadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamo lo bara davar echad levatala. Okay, when Hashem created things in the world, everything was created for a purpose. There's nothing that doesn't have a purpose. Okay. For example, bara shablu lekasis. God created the slug. So you see slugs on the ground. I don't know if it just rains and you see these like, yeah, okay, wow, Max, that was a strong reaction. So basically, you have these like very slimy things. What are they there for? They're there for a cure for a sore, right? So they have a function. They have a purpose. Okay, bara zvuv letzira, flies are part of the cure for the sting of a hornet. Yetush l'nachash, the gnat is a cure for the bite of a snake. V'nachash l'chafafis, and a snake is used for a cure for a certain type of boils. Usmamis la'akrav, and a spider provides a cure for the sting of a scorpion. Okay, so even these types of animals, which are all like completely, seemingly unimportant, seemingly gross, things that which you like don't really care for, they actually all provide. They're all there for healing purposes. Heichi avile. The Gemara goes into a little bit of detail how snakes can be used to cure cure boils. Maisi chada ukma v'chada chivara, one black snake, one white one, v'shalkluhu, and they cook them, v'shaifile, and they rub the side of the boil with it, and then it works. Okay, so bottom line is, we wouldn't know exactly how to make this cure, but we know, practically speaking, there are many types of things, snakes, etc., things which we seem to think which are, annoying, frustrating, whatever it is. They all serve a purpose, and many of these purposes we're much more well aware of nowadays about different animals, different insects which have a purpose. There's a famous story of David HaMelech. Gemara elsewhere tells us where David HaMelech would once ask Hashem, what's the purpose of the spider? And famously, he was once on the run from Shaul and his people, and he runs into a cave, and the spider quickly goes ahead and weaves a web, thank you, and in doing so saves his life because they don't think that he was in there. Bottom line is, sometimes we're in our house and the fly gets in there, or whatever, outside of we don't, and the fly's there and we're all upset or whatever it is. To recognize that all these things have a purpose. We sometimes forget. We're very, we're a little bit centered on ourselves and our personal needs at the moment, but to recognize that all these things serve a purpose in the world, even things which seem to be completely unimportant, they actually serve a purpose. Okay. Mosquitoes, they serve a purpose. I don't know. I'm sure there's something that we are pulling from mosquitoes. I don't know. No, I don't know. Anybody? I would Google it. I'm sure mosquitoes serve some purpose in the world, right? When bees, right? When bees are, now we're on like a decline of bees in the world, and on the one hand, Sukkot time comes, we're all happy. We don't have to have those funny little traps. At the same time, it impacts the honey, production in the world. So I don't know, but I'm sure Google does. But bottom line is, all these things serve a purpose, and sometimes it takes years to find out, right? Many of these things we wouldn't necessarily know until recently. Keep on discovering things, but yeah. Punishing us is also a purpose. That is a very true, very sober view. You're absolutely right. Punishing us is also a purpose. Well said. Well said. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. Sorry.
It's bloodletting. It makes you don't have too much.
Okay. Tana Rabbanan. Okay. Chazal taught us in a braysa, Chamisha Amos Hain. There are 5 scenarios of fear. Emas chalash al gibor, where the fear of the weak is upon the strong. Okay, what are those examples? Emas mafkia al ari. There is something called a mafkia. Not so clear exactly what it is. The Ben Yoyada, writing a few hundred years ago, speaks about this small creature with claws that they would actually, the nobility would actually put into like a cage match between lions and this small little thing. But apparently it was able to jump a lot and used to jump over the lion and basically kill it from the back. So it's a small creature. You would think the lion so strong, but this mafgia would actually overpower it and oftentimes kill it. Emes yatush alapil, a gnat on an elephant. A gnat's a tiny little thing. An elephant's huge, but it would get into the elephant's trunk, and the elephant would not be able to get it out. Emas samamis ala akrab, the spider on the scorpion. Same type of thing. It would get into the orifices of the scorpion, be able to impact it that way. Emas sanunas al nesher, the swallow would get under the eagle and prevent it from spreading its wings. Emas kilbis al levyasan, the fear of the kilbis on the levyasan. Okay, and the kilbis, the small creeping creature which would kill large fish by getting into its ears. Okay, so the bottom line is, sometimes you see things which are very small and thinking that that they serve no purpose, and this actually goes very much aligned with what Murray says. Sometimes the purpose of these small little creatures is actually there to provide punishment for the wicked, or for those who need to get punishment. And so sometimes we see a small thing, the gnat or whatever it is, and they're tiny and they're small, but they're there to provide punishment, whether it's for large animals, and sometimes it's for ourselves. And having a little, at the end of the day, every bit of punishment that we receive in this world, every bit of pain, I should say, we receive in this world, detracts from our ultimate bill with Hashem, in the end of our life. So a few mosquito bites, I don't get a lot of mosquito bites. It's not very nice of me to say, but we all have things. The Gemara says, you put your hand in your pocket and you wanted to pull out a quarter, you pull out a nickel instead. That detracts from your ultimate punishment. So, okay, a little bit of mosquito bites, right? At the end of the day, we'll survive. And at the end of the day, it does ultimately help us. Okay, Rav Yehuda Marav, Mikra Hamavlik Shod al Uz. What is the source of this pasuk? For the source of this idea is found in the pasuk in Amos, which says that Hashem causes the weak to triumph over the powerful, and that is reflected in the 5 cases that were just mentioned above. Okay, Reb Zera Ashkach Rav Yehuda Davikai Apischa Tevei Chamua. Reb Zera once saw Rav Yehuda, who was standing at the door of his father-in-law's house, and he saw that he was in a good mood. If you would ask him anything from anything in the world, Rav Yehuda would tell him. Okay, so basically Rav Zera bumps into Rav Yehuda. He sees Rav Yehuda's in a really good mood, so he figures it's a good time to drill him, right? Sometimes you got to read the room, right? Sometimes people start drilling people, and they're like, They're in a big mood, they're in a bad mood, they're in a rush, don't do it, right? But sometimes he looks like he's in a great mood, he's relaxed, he's chilled, good. So he starts asking him, and he's going to ask him like this whole long list of questions. We're going to try to understand them as best as we can. Amr lay. So he starts drilling him. Grilling him, excuse me. Rav Zera asked him, my time ize maskan beresha. Why do goats walk at the front of the flock? V'hadar imri, and the sheep follow them. Okay, Amr lay, kivriyasa shel olam. First there was dark. The goats are typically dark. And after that there was light. We're going to come back to this Gemara hopefully at the end. But basically, wherever you see a flock of sheep and goats, the goats always walk in the front and the sheep walk after them. He says it's like the creation of the world where there's darkness first and then there is light. Okay, so this seems like what in the world's going on. We'll come back to this, God willing, if we have time, and explain how Rav Tzadok understands this. My taima. Then he asks further. My taima hanami kasyan hanami galyan. Why is it that the back of the sheep are covered by a tail, while the goats, the back is not covered? So he says, Hanim nekasinan minayu, those that we use to cover ourselves, meaning we take the wool from the sheep and we cover ourselves, mikasyan, therefore they too receive the gift of being covered. The handilo mikas minayu, goats, which we don't use to cover ourselves, megalyan, they are uncovered. Okay, so basically there's some symmetry over here, or some midah keneged midah, that since sheep help us cover, we use sheep wool to cover ourselves, Hashem also allows the wool, allows the sheep to have a tail that allows them to be covered. Okay, my time gamla Zutar Gunuvse. Why is it the camel has a small tail? Mishum da achal kise, because it eats thorns, or eats amongst thorns, and therefore if it would have a long tail, it would get stuck in the thorns. Okay, so some would say this like evolutionary, right? That basically like as time went on, that's how they developed, and we would say that whether you take the evolutionary approach or not, ultimately God wanted to ensure that camels would be able to eat comfortably, and therefore gave them a small tail, right? So when we think about our body, we think about the function of our body, right? There's no shortage of literature explaining, how, whether you describe it evolution or from God, each feature of our body is so that we could do what we need to do, and that's true in the animal kingdom as well. Sometimes you'll see things, why is it this way? Could have been a different way. Why do camels have two humps? Whatever it might be. Each thing is there for a precise reason, to allow them to function in the most ultimate, optimal fashion. My time Torah richa gnufte. Why does the ox have a long tail? Because they dwell in swamplands, and they swat away the gnats, right? By having a long tail, it helps them get rid of the, right? You see a horse or whatever, you see any animal like that, which is surrounded by flies or whatever it is, the function of their tail is to swat away any flies or any things or gnats, things which would disturb them. My time akarna de kamsa rechicha, excuse me. Why is it the horns, meaning the antenna of a locust, is soft and flexible? Because they live amongst willows which are stiff. Vikasha, and if the antenna was rigid, nadia umisavra, the antenna would get knocked off. In other words, if they had hard antennas, since they live in a place where they are surrounded by strong things, they live within willows, they would get knocked off, and then they would get blind. If you want to blind a locust, take off its antennas. Right, the antennas are there to provide it guidance, and therefore the antenna is critical. And if it therefore has to be soft because of the place that it lives, it therefore ensures that it hits into hard things, but it doesn't actually break off. It actually is soft. Okay, my taima haitimra de tarnegolta midle le'ela. Why is it the eyes of a rooster go up? Apparently the lids, you and I and most creatures, our eyelids are on top of our eye and it goes down. But a rooster, apparently it's on the bottom and it goes up. You know that? I didn't know that. Okay, fine. Why is that? Adape, because it dwells on boards. What that means is that it oftentimes lives in homes at the top of a home. V'ayal kutra, and smoke, meaning it lives at the top of a house, and smoke is going up in the house. And basically, so smoke is always coming up, and if smoke were able to get into its eyes, but Avra, it would go blind, right? Smoke is not good for our eyes, and it's constantly there on top of smoke, and therefore the eyelids help keep the smoke out of its eye. That's the function. Okay. Then Rav Zera continues asking Rav Yehuda questions, and here he asks some questions about the language. But what's interesting is that the language he's asking about is Aramaic, and this doesn't seem to be such like a Jewish concept. The commentators point out that we'll see from his answers that a lot of Aramaic is actually, at least according to Rav Yehuda, is based on Hebrew. Okay, there's a lot of similarity between Aramaic. We know that there's a lot there, and so the assumption is that a lot of the Aramaic language is going to be based on Hebrew, and you'll see that through the answers. Okay, so he says Dasha. Why is the door called Dasha? Okay, that's the Aramaic word for a door. Derech sham. It's a contraction of the words derech sham. That is the path through there. If you want to get out of the room, you go through there. So it's derech sham. Darga. Why is a ladder called darga? Derech gag. Because a ladder was oftentimes used. Keep in mind, their houses were usually these 1.5 room structures. If you ever go into like any ancient homes, they would have like one big room, and then they'd have an attic, and the way to get to the attic was through a ladder. That's how, and they would live like they would oftentimes have like sleeping rooms up on the top thing. So darga, because derech gag, it's the way to get to the roof. Maskolisa. Maskolisa is a dipping sauce. Okay, why is it called maskolisa? Masai tichlada. When will this be finished? Okay, like dipping sauce. Maybe nowadays we're kind of ravenous and we kind of finish things off quickly. But the point is, dipping sauce would oftentimes last for a very long time. If you're in the laws of like pre-Pesach laws and Arvei Pesachim, it talks about these dipping sauces have to be sold at a certain time because we have to assume we want to make sure that you get rid of it. But the dipping sauce would last. They would just do a little dip. You and I do like a whole shmush and like eat the whole thing, right? We finish our hummus in 10 seconds. But the point is, like, they would dip, like literally just dip into it and eat it. So like when is it over? Things like lasting forever. That's how they would. So that masai tichlada, again, it's a contraction of those words. Besa. Why is a house called Besa? Bov esev ba. Come and sit in it. Okay, it's a contraction of word again of those words. Bov esev ba. Biksa. Why is a small house called a biksa? Be akta, because it stands for the words narrow and small place. Okay, kufta. Why is a mortar called a kufta? Mortar, right? Okay, right, kuf v'sev. Tip it over and sit in it, because a mortar would sometimes be, oftentimes they would double up and use a mortar actually as a seat. Okay, so they would come and sit on it. Livnei. Why are bricks called livnei? Livnei v'nei. Build it for one's children, right? If you build a house with bricks, keep in mind, back in the day, a lot of the houses were made with mud, but if you build a house with bricks, then it's going to last not just for you, but it's going to last for your children. So livnei, for your banei, for your children. Okay, hutza. Why is a thatched fence called hutza? Chatzitza. Hey and ches are interchangeable because it is there as a partition. Chatzba. Why is a barrel called a chatzba? Shechotzev mayim and anar, because it mines water from the river. Barrels were most often used for water. Again, they didn't have running water, and so they would take barrels, put it into a lake, and then or whatever river, or whatever anything, and then bring it back home. So chotzev, it would like kind of mine water from the river. Kuza. Why is a small earthen jug called a kuza? Kazeh, because it's like this. You kind of like pointing something very small. Okay. Shutisa. Why is a myrtle branch called shutisa? Shatusa, because people would dance with it and look like a fool. From the word shtus. Back in the day, and we find a couple of gemaras about this, that myrtle branches, we think of myrtle branches most specifically in the context of Sukkot, but most often myrtle branches were used for dancing. They would use this myrtle branch for dancing, and you would look like a fool, kind of dancing around with this thing. Okay? Mishichla. Why is a washing trough called Meshichla? Mashe Kula, because it washes all. The word Mashe means wash, all Kula means all, and therefore Meshichla. Mashchilsa, ornate washing pitcher, is called a Mashchilsa. Mashia Chalsa, because a bride uses it. It's something which is used specifically for washing in a unique and beautiful fashion. Asisa, a hand mortar called Asisa. Chasirsa, because it is usually it's a something which is it's like a brick which has something missing in the middle. That's basically that's a hand mortar. Okay, buchna, the pestle. The pestle is what you crush with, right? So you basically have the mortar, which is the bowl, and then you have the pestle, which kind of crushes things. Bo va'kena. It's called a buchna from the word bo va'kena. Come, I will strike it. Okay, levusha. Why is an outer cloak called levusha? Lovusha, because when you wear it, you are not embarrassed. Some of Farshim do point out that the word malbush. It's interesting that when does clothing come in? It comes in when Adam and Chava were in a state of busha. So it's actually levusha. It's actually there to counter the busha. Right, levush is from the idea that it comes actually to counter busha, and some actually point out what is the other term that we use for levush, for clothing, is beged. Beged, and the word beged comes actually is associated with the word bagad, which means to rebel. That the whole reason we have clothing, had Adam and Chava not rebelled, we would never have clothing. So the word beged actually reminds us of the fact that it stems from this rebellion against Hashem that Adam and Chava engaged in, and that's why we have clothing. So it's both for the rebellion as well as for the busha that they experienced, the embarrassment that they experienced afterwards. Okay, glima. Why is an overcoat called glima? Shenasa bo kegolem. When you wear an overcoat, maybe not nowadays, everything's like form fitting, but back in the day, an overcoat was basically basically just this like big like thing which is hung over you. You look like a golem. A golem is basically like this like shapeless form. You look like a blob. That's what when you wear an overcoat, you look like a blob. That's the idea behind it. Gulsa, a cape is called gulsa. Why? Gale va'aseh, because a person reveals themselves when they sit down. Okay, gale from the word reveal. Puria, why is a bed called puria? Sheparin v'ravin aleh, because period of rivia and procreation takes place on it. Bar zinka, why is a dried out water pit called bar zinka? Bar zanaki, because the pit is clean. Sudra, why is the head wrap, which was specifically worn by the rabbis, called the sudra? Soda shem le'rev, it comes from the words that the secret is revealed to those who fear Hashem, and that's sudra. Okay, apana. Why is a palace called apana? Apischa dain, because to this door, because everyone would gather by the palace. Okay, taner abanan. Shlosha kozman shemazkinin mosifin gvura. One last thing about natural phenomenon, and that three creatures, as long as they age, they become stronger. Ve'elohein, what are those? Dog, menachash, vechazir, fish, snake, and swine. The older they get, the stronger they get. Okay, let's go a little bit further, and then shemen kedi lasuch ever katan. The Mishnah said an oil enough to anoint a small limb. Okay, so the Gemara is going to discuss which small limb. Amr devei Rav Yanai, shemen kedi lasuch ever katan shel katan ben yomo. Which small limb? The small limb of a newborn child. So just enough oil to. So imagine we're talking about something tiny. You think of the pinky or something of a newborn child. So enough oil to anoint that. Meisvei, the Gemara asked the Bryce. So shemen, we have a Bryce that says like this: oil kedi lasuch ever katan vik katan ben yomo, and not enough to anoint a small limb and a day old infant. My love. So it says enough to anoint a small limb and a day old infant. So my love, ever katan de gadol. This would seem to imply enough oil to anoint a small limb of an adult. Ve'ever gadol shel katan ben yomo. It separates into two things. It would seem like a small limb of an adult or a large limb of a day old infant. The fact that it says two things implies there's two things going on. Could count this in low? No. Hachgamar. This is the way to read it. Shemen kedi lasuch ever katan shel katan ben yomo. Instead of or, you could say of, and say enough to anoint a small limb of a young child. Okay, Limakatanai. The Gemara says maybe this small limb thing is a dispute amongst them. Why? Shemen, because we have rice that says like this: oil kedi lasuch ever katan mekatan ben yomo. One opinion says enough to anoint a small limb and a day old infant. Divrei Rav Shimon Elazar, Rabbi Nassan Omer kedi lasuch ever katan, and Rav Nassan says enough to anoint a small limb. So here you see it's clearly machlokes. My lava kamifli. Maybe this was their argument. Rav Shimon ben Elazar savar ever katan shal katan. Rav Shimon Elazar, the first opinion says it's enough to anoint a small limb of an infant. Rav Nassan savar, Rav Nassan, who's countering it, says no. Aver katan de gadol, aver katan gadol de katan. It's a small limb of an adult or a big limb, large limb of an infant. Aval aver katan shel katan ben yom lo, bless you. But a small limb of a day old infant is not sufficient according to the opinion of Nassan. The Gemara counters and says lo. Aver katan ben yom lo. Everyone in this brayso agrees that the small limb of a day old infant is not liable. Laces Rav Yanai, and this brayso does not go like Rav Yanai at all. The hacha balkim. This is the argument. Rav Shimon Elazar savar aver katan de gadol, aver gadol de katan ben yom kiadadi ninhu. Rav Shimon Elazar, the first opinion is saying the small limb of an adult and a large limb of a day old infant are actually the same. Rav Nassan savar aver katan de gadol in. If you take it enough to carry for enough oil for the small limb of an adult, then you're liable. Aver gadol de katan ben yom lo, but enough to anoint a large limb of a day old infant is still not enough. My have law, what's the halacha? Tashma, the tiny we have a brayso that says Rav Shimon Elazar Omer shemen kedi lasuch aver katan shel katan ben yomo. Ultimately, we come out like that first opinion, like Devei Rav Yanai, that it's enough oil to anoint the small limb of a small child, which is a very minuscule amount of oil. So let's just go back to that opening. The first thing that we saw from Yehuda, this idea of the dark coming out before the light. So Rav Tzadok explains that in this world that we live in a world of mixture of both good and darkness, and that means that every single thing that comes into the world, by definition, is a mixture of good and bad. There's nothing that could come into this world completely unfiltered, separated, completely good. You can't get anything that's completely good. So he says that what actually happens is just like in the creation of the world. First there was night, then there was day. First there was darkness, then there was light. When Hashem brings things into the world, oftentimes he'll first bring in the darkness, and then we'll bring in the light. So sometimes we come and we experience something which is so bad, we have to recognize that sometimes it's just like there's nothing in this world that could come in purely good, and therefore sometimes Hashem brings into this world, wants to give us bracha, but the only way to bring certain bracha in the world is it's attached to something which is not good, meaning everything in this world is a mix, and therefore sometimes we're going to experience that bad, and that's what we're going to see first, and it's so bad, but we just have to dig a little bit deeper, so through davening, through just waiting, through patience, through faith, and ultimately we're going to get to that good, better part that's part of it. So to recognize that there's that darkness, the darkness of the goats that come before the light of the sheep, is that's the way of the world, that Hashem, whenever Hashem is bringing anything into this world, there's nothing in this world that's pure, because it's a world of hell, it's a world of hiddenness, and therefore we're very often going to experience something dark, and to recognize that patience, ultimately to daven, and then we're able to see the other side of it, to recognize the good that's there as well. Have a great day.